right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 186, maybe, of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I have my regular co-host, Ian Kummer, streaming live from a suburb in Moscow. And we have a special guest today. First name is Sæþór. That is his Icelandic name. He is a member of the American Communist Party. He's paying his dues at the American Communist Party, and he is also the chairman of an Icelandic socialist party, I think the Socialist Party of Iceland. And our topic today is a very broad one. We're going to discuss the weaponization of identity politics. I'm sure we all have some great, strong opinions on this topic. But before we get into all that, I was going to ask our special guest, Sæþór, to just kind of maybe explain a little bit about himself and how he ended up in Iceland, because he was born in the United States. Is that correct, Sæþór?
Correct.
So how did that happen? How did you end up being born in the United States and then moving to Iceland to start a socialist party, or to be the chairman of a socialist party?
So I was raised in Virginia. My father is a Southern Baptist minister who voted for Trump all 3 times you're allowed to. I went to a private religious school. It was not possible to be out of the closet. I'm a homosexual, married to an Icelandic man. But my school would have ejected me if I had come out while I was still in school. Very, very religious. I also did some time in Texas where they still used wooden paddles on us for discipline. I started working in the video game industry, which took me around to Georgia, Texas, DC, and Los Angeles. And LA was where my last city in the US before I moved. And I was working on the Tony Hawk and Guitar Hero series there. And so that gave me some vacation days compared to most Americans, not as many as I have here, but some, and the money to travel. And so I had started going regularly every year to a new European city or European country to visit other 3D artists who also worked in the industry that I knew from the internet. And I remember just being blown away by Italy and France and Scotland and all the European countries, because I'd never traveled outside of the US before. And it kind of opened my horizons that the US was not the only place and the only society. The architecture, the fashion, just the way the men dressed and carried themselves, the women too, it just really felt like culture shock. And so after, being raised religious, I got the conservative view of the world. And then when I started working in the major metropoles, I went over into kind of like a liberal Democrat explanation of things. But then I started to read me some Chomsky, some, ideas that the justice system is very racist, that the US government had done some bad war actions, like baby political awakening. And I thought everyone else just must also have been kept in a cult and ignorant of it. Surely we all want to work on these terrible things. But I basically got the, be quiet. We've got a good job. Pipe down. We don't need unions. What racism? I remember arguing that Google was as bad as the Chinese censorship, which at the time I thought was real, and being, gaslit about that. And so I decided when I was working on the Wild West game called Gun, which was a precursor to Red Dead Redemption, and would have taken that market if Activision hadn't canceled it. And that was why I moved to Los Angeles, was to work on this really cool project with a good team. And when they canceled it, this was when Skate first came out, and they were worried that Skate was going to take all the market share from Tony Hawk. And so they closed down Gun 2, where I was going to be like one of the main character artists on, very exciting, to put all of us on Tony Hawk 8 or 9. And I had already met all the people who were like, I'm so dead inside. I've made 5,000 hoodies and 600 pairs of DC shoes. And I was like, that's not what I moved to LA to do. And so I used that cancellation as kind of my, all right, I'm going to move and leave. And I had no idea that other countries had immigration rules. I thought I could just find a new place and live there. And so I went to Montreal, I went to Finland, I went to Switzerland, I went to Germany, and I went to Iceland. And most of these places I was visiting and staying with other video game artists, and most of them were heterosexuals. So when I would visit a new place, I wanted to know a gay guy to like tell me where the bars are and where to go. And when I was going to come to Iceland, I started talking to my now husband in 2006. And so when I came here, we met right away, hit it off. We got. He said, "Why don't you stop moving around and come live here?" And I started working for CCP, which makes Eve Online, and that's how I got my high-tech workers permit to live and work in Iceland legally. And that was 2007. We married in 2009, and I got my citizenship in 2013. And I started participating in a working class union as well as the Socialist Party as a member, but I still had to learn Icelandic. And I need to turn my volume down because I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. Sorry. And so I had to learn Icelandic in order to participate. And that took a little while to figure out the lay of the political land. And so I then got elected to the board of the Working Class Union, where I've been since 2022. We've done some strikes. We've managed to get the state mediator fired and the head of the business association through our strikes and action. And then this kind of taught me how organized politics work. We're very Leninist, even though no one would describe it like that in the union. And I saw how well that works. And basically, when the chairman of the Socialist Party for the first 8 years, when his election period was over, I used that opportunity to run for the office with a group, because we didn't run directly for the chairmanship. You get everyone runs for the board, and then as soon as the board is elected, you pick who is going to be the chairman. So this was an organized project, and I volunteered to be chairman. And there's actually 3 boards. So anyone who's listening from my union, from my party, I'm the chairman of the executive board, not of the whole party. But the executive board looks after the day-to-day and the finances and the housing and the party registry. And we have over 2,000 registered members. And the Icelandic population is 390,000 people. As soon as I saw the ACP, I followed along with like the CPUSA, let's, vote down supporting the Democrats. And then when the cheating happened and forming the ACP, I was like, okay, stuff is happening. And as soon as it was possible to register and start like following along on Telegram and paying dues, I was like, I've got to support this action because this is like the only bright spot in American politics that I can see.
That is a riveting explanation of how you ended up in Iceland and what you're doing now. You reached out to me because you wanted to discuss this particular topic. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but identity politics. And I mean, from the perspective of rational people like us and the rational political parties like the ACP, we understand that identity politics is really a benefit to, the oligarchy and the ruling class, because it's what they push on us, and it pretends that that's what leftism is, and then they use it, to divide us and keep us at each other's throats, and allows them to maintain, their dictatorship, really, their control over the political apparatus. So, what is your take on that broad picture? I mean, I think that's probably what we all agree on, is the broad picture. But like, how would you describe identity politics, and what function does it serve in, in Iceland and in the United States and in the West in general?
Yeah, it's the old ABC, anything but class. We just we have a book club in the party, and the book this month is "We Were Never Woke" by Musa Gabri. I can't remember his last name, but Musa. And I highly recommend it because he basically describes 4 great awakenings: anti-slavery, civil rights, feminism, and the modern like identity politics. And by laying it out 4 different times with like the up and down, he then like connects the thread between all of them. And surprise, it's like a class defense mechanism for like middle class people who are about to arrive into the secure middle, who feel this threatened. And so this is like a real thing. Like, people were against slavery, they were for civil rights. Women have and are treated unequally. There exists people who aren't straight that would like to have changes in the human rights and the legal code, but it can be picked up and used as a cynical weapon. I like to liken it to Hillary Clinton grabbing a rainbow flag and sharpening the tip of the spear and using it to stab her political enemies with. And it's also a great example because she was up against Bernie Sanders, who's defended gay, queer, all kinds of people since the 70s. And, she went in front of the Senate in 2004 in her pencil dress and pearl necklace and pretended she had a Southern accent to suggest that they not ratify same-sex marriage. But then in 2016, the Human Rights Campaign endorsed her. And I'm like, what? Why? Other than it's power, it's class, it's, keeping the status quo in place. And the other angle I like to explain it from is when we look at the gay rights struggle here in Iceland, because it's the first protest in front of Parliament it was either 80, 81, or 82. I forget the exact day, but it was 6 men, and 3 or 4 of them like covered their face because they were worried about retribution afterwards. And they read some kind of speech, and it had to be like long activism. All of the gay men knew each other's names. The lesbians knew each other's names. This was like an organic, actual, let's push for something. And it was risky. There came consequences, but it was an actual organic struggle to like push human rights and laws in a different direction, versus the current version is top down. It's not like gay people get to decide what the message is this week. We get it on Twitter or, the Guardian or the New York Times or whatever, and then everyone is supposed to follow the script. And if you're not exactly on it, then all the like shaming and screaming and insults, and you can have your card taken away. You can be a woman, but if you don't say the right feminist thing, then it doesn't count. You can be the 2 black women who worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign, but because they weren't with Hillary, they were the island of misfit black girls and it was taken away. I can be a gay immigrant, but if I don't like the woke as prescribed, then I'm somehow like an American MAGA communist bad person. So it's very flexible how you can like lose these Pokemon points if you don't follow the script.
I know the American Communist Party, I mean, there's, when they were forming, after they formed, I mean, there was a lot of, allegations and assertions that, they were like misogynist and they were anti-trans, anti-gay. And, I don't really see that. So, there's this social media. I mean, because that's primarily where I see it on social media. I'm not going to rallies and things like that, but on social media, you definitely see how the discussions can quickly turn into just like a mob assault instead of a rational discussion of, reality and where people's, nuanced positions actually are. And all the time, I just see, anybody that tries to take a nuanced position, if they're not just, reading the script correctly, they just get really attacked and piled on, canceled, cancel culture. So like, where does that come from? And I mean, why are there so many people that are eager to engage in that dynamic and not be more thoughtful and reasonable and allowing some nuance,
Well, it's a lazy pre-made weapon, because if you think about now what the ACP is trying to do, or the Socialist Party under the new leadership, we want to be very serious and nuanced. If there comes out something like we put out a condemnation of the kidnapping of Maduro with no like apologies or qualms, like some of the other parties were like, well, it's illegal, but he's a dictator kind of thing. We just said, bad, not good. But we have we debated it. It was passed through all the boards for approval. We have deep debate about the European Union or immigration policy or the other things. So we have like an actual serious discussion. But then when I look at the other parties, they're really just Icelandic translations of either the Republicans or the Democrats with maybe some little regional flavors. So if you are for one of them, there's no policy crafting. And so despite being a gay immigrant, the people who didn't like that I'm now the chairman from the Socialist Party tried to accuse me of transphobia, immigrant hatred, xenophobia, not with any argument behind it, but because that's the ready-made argument. If you're not good left, then you must be racist, you must be transphobic, you must be one of these bad things, because there's currently not any room for a class-based version that explains why have we imported so many immigrants? Why was it the right-wing parties connected to the businesses that specifically put Ukraine and Venezuela on a speed track to get working visas here when they don't do anything for human rights? It must be connected to class and exploitation, but that's not anything that the other left parties that are pro-capitalist parties, they can't explain that because they don't do anything about class or class analysis.
And that's true of parties that call themselves socialists. I mean, other parties that even call themselves socialists in the name, they're not really like the Democratic Socialists.
Yes.
So you would think just by their name that they would be dealing with class, and class would be, defining their policies, but it's just not.
But if that's how it worked, I'd take a nice crunchy bite out of a urinal cake.
Okay.
It's cake. It's in the name.
Yes. What are those birds called?
Speaking of what you're saying, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ian. It's all right.
Speaking of what you're saying about people calling you a transphobe and a bigot as a tool to it wasn't an argument; it was just meant to discredit and silence you. So in 2022, and I have a blog, by the way, readingjunkie.com. So this is where I would blog and I'd write stuff. So in 2022, when I started sharing, I would post in various, a lot of left-leaning groups, claim to be, we're against U.S. imperialism, we're against this, we're against that, blah, blah, blah. I posted to several of these groups. And I remember I did that one day. And I went to bed and I woke up the next day and I happened to check my own website. I noticed there on my website, not even on Facebook, but on my website, there was a spike, like a whole bunch of a spike in searches for trans and transgender. That was it. Like literally someone just goes to the site, doesn't look at anything, but just searches trans. I want to see what he said about trans, and like I kind of realized because, they see that, I have a contrarian viewpoint on Russia and Ukraine, but they don't want to argue with me. They want to say, well, I want to say he's a transphobe. I want to find some transphobic thing he said and use that. And it's completely unrelated topic to shut down his argument.
If we have right now, because if you just work like a low wage job, that it doesn't matter what your opinions are because you're just totally replaceable. When you want a middle class job that has better pay and better benefits, whether it's the US or here, we have a class system. You have to kind of police yourself so that you're appropriate for that job. And especially in Iceland, where it's very small and everybody knows everyone. And so if you ever have wrong think, you're risking your ability to reproduce yourself to get that job that has good benefits. So for example, we have municipal elections in May, and we're the second most popular party with the 16 to 29-year-old group. So you've been really just measure the dose of McCarthyism. The older they get, the less they like the Socialist Party, and the younger it's yeah, we love it. So the mouthpiece of the wealthy is trying to somehow how can we come against this? So they found a 2-year-old Facebook post of mine where I wrote that Xi, Putin, and Kim Jong and Assad are better leaders than anyone in the West. And I remember when I wrote it, I was trying to be like provocative and I was just mad, but I was nobody. I didn't have any election seat to think about. I wasn't representing anyone but myself. It was just a troll post. They made a front page article on one of the main newspapers with a bubble that has Xi in profile, Putin in profile, Kim Jong in profile, with me and the secretary of the executive board, who also likes China and has publicly talked about China. And we both visited the Chinese embassy together by invitation to be like, look, they like people on the naughty list, to try and decrease interest or support in the party. And I think some people might have seen it and been like based, but for anyone that's scared kind of thing, if I had a middle-class career that I had to worry about, this would have been like just complete destruction. And I would never be able to get a job as in the media, video games, any of the well-paid jobs. And so no one wants to risk that. They know it, whether they can write it out or if they've just kind of perceived it. You don't want to get that label, which is one reason why it's been pursued so far, because then it becomes dangerous to say or think anything that's not like, I'm with her, what inflation, Kamala deserves to be president, Russia bad, whatever the U.S.
Israel deserves our support. They're a democracy. I was thinking about the problem trying to, have a political party based on reality in a society that everybody is just entirely detached from reality, and their beliefs are just they've been so inculcated and indoctrinated that they're just taught to advocate against their own best interest. So that makes politicking really hard. That makes political partying really hard when the masses of people are indoctrinated to advocate against their own best interest. Because normally a political party is going to speak the truth and just say, hey, this is what we need to advocate for as a working class, and this is the reality. And kind of part of that is going to be saying things that are very inflammatory, and that a lot of people, maybe a majority of the people, are going to be shocked by, and it's going to turn them off, because of the generational cradle to grave indoctrination that everybody's had in Western society. But because, again, I think it's true, right? Imagine if we had leaders like Xi or Putin in the West, like real leadership that identified, working class interests, and then really plan to pursue them. That's ultimately what they do. But we don't have anything like that in the West. And so when you suggest truth, when truth itself is the thing that is making you unpopular, right? Mm-hmm. That's a problem. And so in politics, it's almost like you have to lie to be popular. But then if you lie, it's like, what separates you from the other liars? And so it just seems very difficult. And the difficulty lies in the fact that, so many people are indoctrinated and have been trained to hate what's good for them and advocate for the interests of others, namely the wealthy elites.
Yeah. I would agree with all of that, with the exception of one thing. I think that all of these people are voting in their best interest, because the U.S. and the West in general, since the end of World War II, benefits from American and British imperialism, having the dollar as the world reserve currency. The U.S. and England and all the rest of Europe sucks in the resources of the world, and most of it goes in the bank accounts of the wealthy. But that's where the money for our welfare system comes from. The Norwegian oil fund is one of the largest buyers of Ukrainian farmland now, since the law has been changed to allow them to buy it up. So this is to obey and justify America's imperialist projects is actually good, even for the working and middle class of the empire core, because it's not a self-sustaining system. If you could put a glass bubble around the United States and they couldn't import and export IP and gold and manufactured goods, it would collapse in a week. It's not self-sustaining. So this is more, I see it as clearly this is not a stable system. We're watching the decline of the ability to maintain it like that. And that's where the energy and the discontent and the protests, and, you know, right now it's not really being mobilized in a way that could take power away, but clearly the discontent is there. The tent cities and all the major American cities are there. And that's why I think both the ACP in the US and the Socialist Party here in Iceland, we need to be ready to explain it over a long period of time, because that's another lesson I took from Bernie Sanders. He was not all that popular in the 70s and 80s. He was saying things that people thought were just insane, but because he was so consistent, when they gave us Pete Buttigieg in 2020, look, gay men, we're going to give you a handsome gay man so you don't pay attention to Bernie Sanders. 55% of us were still in support of Bernie Sanders out of a 24-person field, because we knew who was actually going to stick with it and follow along these things, because he had already for so long. So being able to, I agree, you've got to speak truth to power, even if it's comes with a hit now. But I just wanted to mention that because that's one of the few things that communists or Marxists or Leninists or people who understand imperialism can explain, that America being able to exploit South America or break open the USSR and slurp out all the resources, that was in the benefit of the American and British and French working class.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, and obviously the working class doesn't benefit nearly to the degree of, you know, the wealthy elites. But, you know, I probably wouldn't have been allowed to go $1 million in debt, you know, which is mostly my home. But I couldn't have done that, perhaps, you know, without this exploitative imperialist system. So that's true. But you think and it's a fine line between, you know, proclaiming truth regardless of how it's perceived, and also maybe trying to say it in such a way that it doesn't, you know, result in turning people off due to their indoctrination. So, I mean, we don't want to compromise on truth, but we can be tactful, and we can, you know, talk about it in a way that kind of appeals to people as a way to get like in their face. And so I'm just thinking about, you know, your post, because I endorse that post. I've said many things like that, you know, Putin and Kim and Xi are real leaders, but because of the indoctrination of these people, like it's revolting. And they're like, oh, those are monsters. Our guys aren't monsters. Our guys are, you know, they might have problems.
Yeah. I want to check back in on that now that all the Epstein files have come out. They're not monsters.
Right. For sure.
Demons.
And I mean, I know with Xi personally, I mean, I don't know him personally, but I know with him personally, with the CIA documents describing him and talking about him before he was elected as the, I'm not sure, is he called the chairman or the president?
He's both.
Chairman and president of China. You know, they were CIA, you know, in these leaked cables were, you know, he was above reproach. He was redder than red was one of them, and just really uncorruptible. That was why the West did not like him, because of, you know, his lack of ability to corrupt and his sincere ideological leanings, you know, towards Marxism and communism. So that's definitely not anybody the West can work with. And so for those reasons, man, imagine if we had that here. That would be really great.
Yeah. But just to add to that real quick, please. I agree that's a description of Xi, but I feel like, so I really like Plekhanov has a paper about the individual and their role in history. And he talks about when Napoleon fell off his horse and almost died. And they're the people who think that if he did die, then everything would have been totally different. But he says, you never heard about all the amazing generals that were right there around Napoleon that could have come up and filled that void, because it wasn't just him with laser eyes and bulletproof skin. He was representing a movement in the same way that Trotsky had people behind him, much fewer, and Stalin had more behind him. So with Xi, he was the response to all the corruption that was going on in the party. The members who wanted to get rid of it found an incorruptible person to be the in that seat, because they wanted to get rid of the corruption. So That's why I like Mao's idea of the mass line, that you have to be among the people like a fish in the sea, because that's how you know what can we talk about now that doesn't send everyone running. And now I know I don't talk about these leaders when I'm having regular party meetings, even when someone's shit talking them and I want to go, I'm like sitting there going, serenity now, Sæþór. The appropriate thing, we've got housing here is just insane and out of control. The new generation just knows that they're never going to have a house. Inflation's out of control. They're doing a full-on war against the unions and the ability to negotiate. So there is working class, generic, or like the general populace desire for something different. And the Socialist Party has to figure out how to like talk to that and mobilize it. And as we go through stuff, it will clarify. Like if we tried to talk about Maduro or Venezuela a year ago, it would have been impossible. But when the US goes and just kidnaps him, then people are like, well, that's definitely illegal. Or Iran. We could have never talked about that a year ago. When the US bombed Iran, we were able to put out a thing that just said bad. Shouldn't have done that. That's totally illegal and against international law. Something happened that moved us through time and space. And if I just go, nope, you don't have the right line about everything, so I'm not going to participate in this party, I would still be by myself, maybe with a perfect line, but there's nothing I can do because I also don't have laser eyes or bulletproof skin.
So that's it. Go ahead, Ian. Sorry.
Go ahead, Billy Bob. Oh.
Well, I was going to say, you touched on a lot of, true things. I mean, one thing is, we do tend to get hyper fixated on leaders, right? It's just so easy. But yeah, in the reality, it wasn't Stalin doing all these things. It was the party, and everything was, voted on, and they had open debate. And what ultimately happened was, what the majority wanted to do. And Stalin was just like the figurehead leader. And so there's a word for that. There's a term for that.
Democratic centralism. And the first thing that I did as the chairman of the Socialist Party is I introduced that concept to my executive board. We had to delay because we have what's called fresta. You bring something up and then you're not ready to vote on it this meeting. So you fresta and then you pick it back up later. And we then approved in our meeting minutes that we were going to do, you can put something on the agenda. We're going to debate it, and then we're going to have a vote, what we're going to do. And then after we vote, even if you're in the minority, you have to pursue the outcome that we all spoke about. And the only time you can bring it back up is if something new happens or there's a new input or people's opinions have changed and there's a reason to put it back on the agenda. But that was Trotsky's sin, is he would put something up, it didn't get approved, and then he would run out to the press or the general public and be like, I didn't get my way.
Yes.
So
you go ahead, Ian.
Yeah. So what you're saying, history isn't isn't super empowered individuals. It is large movements of people that you can't change by just killing or shifting one person. And it's interesting because that's actually a theme of, if any of you've read Isaac Asimov, he wrote the Foundation series, a science fiction story, but it talks about the idea of psychohistory. And basically, it's about the scientist who predicts the fall of this galactic empire, hundreds of years before it happens, and that's the whole theme of the book. That history is just these big movements, and there's no you can't change them because they're just it's millions or billions of people gradually evolving one way or the other. You can't kill Hitler or kill Napoleon or one particular guy. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make any difference over hundreds of years. Though I do think when it comes to identity politics, which is our theme of the show today, I do think it has. I mean, it is like I gave my example. We all have our own personal examples of it being used to silence dissent. But I think as its own political ideology, we can't dismiss. It's positive. There's the negative goal, and by negative goal, I mean just you're canceling, you're silencing dissent. But then there's the positive goal of there's things that this movement doesn't have, that are trying to achieve, and they see identity politics as a way to achieve those things. So it's not just a way to silence dissent. I think it's actually a coherent ideology. Now, if you look in the description of this video, actually, I have a link to a chapter of a biography of Stalin, which talks about the communist movement, the Marxist-Leninist movement in the Caucasus. And it talks a lot about populist nationalism and international Marxism, which is related. It's not gender, that sort of thing, but it is woke in the sense of it's talking about how does people's individual nationality play into politics. So it's a similar theme. I think there's a lot to be said for the idea that Western governments, particularly the USA and the CIA and the federal government, they all saw Marxist-Leninism. And they took pages from its playbook, because if you look at even their own unclassified documents, they were obsessed, like with Martin Luther King. They called him a Marxist-Leninist. I'm not sure he actually was a Marxist-Leninist, but they called him one. They were obsessed particularly with homosexuality, like the FBI. I'm not even making this up. They actually had classes, like they taught their field agents how to spot a gay man from how he acted and talked, because they assumed if you're a homosexual, you're probably a communist.
Mm-hmm. The lavender scare.
So this establishment became very obsessed with sexuality and became very obsessed with Marxist-Leninism. And when you're obsessed with someone, you can also kind of learn from them too. So I think it's not even unfair to say they adopted some Marxist guerrilla tactics that Marxist-Leninists used to advance the revolution. And the CIA said, oh, that's interesting. We can take some of those ideas and we can twist them around a little bit and use them ourselves.
I agree with that. And this is something that I think about a lot, because obviously there exist gay people, lesbians, bisexual, intersex, trans people. These are like identities that exist, and people who have them want to like live a life where, like, I love having legally recognized marriage, because like we bought a house together, we have kids together through the foster system. So there needs to be like the same formal recognition that straight couples have. But I think that you're correct in that they seized upon it. I sometimes describe queer people now as a cybernetic vanguard party for capitalism. So if we're supposed to be the vanguard to explain and try and bring about a different economic system, like not capitalism, now like the loudest, most vocal queer people, whether it's Anderson Cooper, Andrew Sullivan, Owen Jones, I forget if it's the Raytheon CEO that's a trans woman now. When you get actual like full grade AA fascism, the queer people go in the camps and the violence rises higher, even just with social degradation. And so it benefits us to like defend a system that currently protects us. So like if you're a rich enough queer person in the US or England or Iceland, all of the institutions, the police, the courts, the media, the television, they protect us. They justify us. They put us in all this TV shows and everything. So it would benefit us financially to participate, as this is good and all the other systems are bad. And I actually think that Angela Merkel got lent on to stop, because Germany was the holdout in Europe for same-sex marriage. And it was because she, as the chairman of her party, forbade the party to vote as individuals. They had to vote as a bloc, and she used her Christian religion to say, no, we shouldn't adopt same-sex marriage. But that prevented the West as a whole as presenting itself as good with human rights versus Iran, Cuba, so bad. And so like by basically telling her like, look, you need to get with the system, get with the program and change this rights. She apparently met some lesbian couple that changed her mind. And so she let her party vote with their conscience. She still voted against it, but then Germany approved same-sex marriage. And now if you were to, describe the poles of power, the West, the international rules-based order, has their gender rights and laws mostly on track. I mean, there's still 20 plus states where you can be fired or evicted for being queer, but that's a class issue because that's never going to happen to a rich NGO gay in DC. So they can kind of ignore that happens to, poor Black people in the South, or that without healthcare, the number one unmedicated HIV positive group are like Black and brown Americans, or all the queer homeless teenagers all around the US. But it looks like it's settled. And so it can be used as a weapon to describe the anti-imperialist nations who don't obey America as bad because they don't have these rights. And then you get rainbow imperialism, which is where anytime there's a new, we're going to bomb Iran, we're going to bomb Afghanistan, we're going to bomb Iraq. It's very easy to justify to gay men and queer people who largely don't follow politics deeply that it's justified because they're not good to gay people. They throw them off of buildings. So why would you defend this country?
Well, it does push, those progressive politics do push the whole political spectrum in that direction. Like I remember a few months ago, I was arguing with some conservative guy. It was on Facebook. This is a right-wing Republican, I assume a Trump supporter type guy, arguing with him about it. And he was like, well, Iran doesn't even have gay marriage. These stone gays. They throw gays. It's like, oh,
now you
I thought you were a conservative. Why do you care? I mean, it's just we've gotten to the point. I mean, I could never have imagined this. I was born in 1988, by the way. So, the Bush years and like the Obama years, I never could have imagined American politics coming to the point where you have Republicans saying we have to bomb this country and destroy their cities because they don't have rights for gays. Like I never thought it would come to that.
I phrase it like 70% of STEM graduates in Iran are women, but they can't start an OnlyFans. So
yes, they can't.
Are they really free?
Right. So on that same note, oh my gosh. So yeah, and I think
if I can real quick add, and I've asked this, and I've never heard a good response from any of the queer groups. I asked this to one of the, we have a gay and lesbian association here, and I could talk for hours about it, but I asked them once, and I've never heard a good answer. If we, as queer people, hitch our flag and rights to American imperialism, what happens if it either loses or falls apart in security? And again, we need some kind of actual community to come together to make sure that we can, get HIV medication or basic safety or housing or any of these things. And we've allowed all of our community to be completely destroyed because now it's just part of the system. We don't know each other and we're in all different political parties and there's no cohesion in the group anymore. That already happened in Berlin. It was like a gay man's wonderland before the Nazis came. And then it turned around real quick and you either had to go into the closet. Some men literally like threw their partners out to the wolves. All of the freedom and safety went away. Gay men went into camps if they weren't rich enough to hide. So like this idea that it's the end of history and they're never going away and we never have to worry about them is obviously not true. But there's no answer to that within like end of history, liberal, like no knowledge of history, no knowledge of how we got here. And the loudest screamers were never part of the actual, I'm going to risk my job. I'm going to show my face. I'm going to come out before it's totally secure.
Well, I can even if next time you want to talk to your, those people in that association about this, there is an example you can bring up. You can actually bring up Russia as an example because Russia had its liberal phase where it was very, and again, we talked about movements. Putin isn't just a strong man who came out of nowhere and puts the country under his thumb. He was one of Yeltsin's boys who, when Yeltsin himself had been discredited because of the economic collapse at the turn of the century, Putin came forward and was the successor. So he was very much representing that very liberal, late Soviet Russian Federation liberal movement that wants to be buddies with the best buddies with the U.S. establishment. So they were trying very hard. I mean, and if you look at, even just Russian education, if you look at Russian literature about these subjects, I mean, they in every field, like the idea of integrated education, of taking the mentally handicapped kids and putting them in classrooms with, the healthy kids. That's a very Western idea. The Soviet Union never did that. So integrated education, gender and sex, every topic you can think of, they were trying very hard. Like they repealed capital punishment because Soviet Union had capital punishment, but then they ended capital punishment because the West considered that, that's not fair. They did all these things, same thing with their kind of, they were tolerating, LGBT more, open LGBT type movements more than they would probably have liked to. Well, then, you had these increasing confrontations, right? You had with Georgia and South Ossetia, then you had, again, with Crimea and the Maidan Revolution, and then it really just kind of crossed the point of no return in 2022, where it was just, the Iron Curtain came back up, and it was just us versus them. And I noticed, like, and it's there, it's all public, you can look online, all of these, like, kind of anti-natal, like, the feminist and anti-natalist and LGBT, like every kind of progressive movement and page in Russia, all sided with the U.S.
Yeah, because they're all getting their money from the U.S.
Yes.
These NGOs, this is what the CPC actually put out, like a paper, exactly how the NGOs function and why they're banned in China. And so this is, the coup that just happened in Bangladesh. The Gray Zone has an article about it where they literally used a trans rapper concert to bring all the youth together and then to give them, like, boo the current government marching orders that helped, like, bring down the government. So, like, we've essentially I made an illustration. I made a Trojan horse, but I painted it with a rainbow flag because it's supposed to be about helping local queer people increase their rights. But every time it's the U.S. government inside to bring down the government based on economics, and none of the gay rights are ever improved unless maybe, for the highest paid, most privileged section, but you don't actually get, like, full-on legal changes or safety for the members. So then it makes sense for Burkina Faso or Belarus or Georgia or China to just say, nope, you don't get to have NGOs here because we know that you're just tools of American empire filled with Soros and Ford Foundation and NED and USAID money.
Well, that's the problem. So it's not just, I want to be gay or I want to be a lesbian or whatever. It's, when we talk about LGBT, it's very much become a political tool of the U.S. Government and U.S. State Department. I think that people get hung up on that because when you say that, people say, oh, well, you hate LGBT people. It's like, no, it's not that. It's not even against individual people. It's against how that brand, if you will, it's a brand. It's become a corporate brand, and that brand is used by the U.S. as a hammer against unfriendly countries, as they call them. Mm-hmm.
But also, some of these things, I think we sometimes have to let them burn out on their own. So, for example, we had our previous prime minister, Katrin Jakobsdottir. I voted for her with my first voting right. She was like, boo NATO, yay Palestine, let's look after our nature, and women, let's help women. I was like, well, I like all of those things, I'll vote for you. And then she formed a coalition government with the right-wing Capitalist Party, and they basically ran the show, and she just ran cover for them. We got a new contract with Mike Pence as VP to use the Keflavik Air Base for kidnapping prisoners to Guantanamo.
The VP of USA, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, under Trump. They came and they signed it at the house that Gorbachev and Reagan signed the end of the Cold War at. Basically just like, like a demonic ceremony in a Catholic church, just totally, and but her party is now like dead. They're having to try and resurrect. They like grabbed one of the people unhappy with me and my new board in our party. She's quit to go over and like help them out. They've got no support anymore because she killed it all with her hypocrisy. But it wasn't really possible to get rid of her before then because she was just so popular with the general public. They liked that she smiled a lot. She was pretty. She's never any problems. She didn't ask for any conflict or anything. She's just like, I'm just here and glad to be here. And so we should have been able to talk about this is not working. And I'm not a misogynist for saying it, but we didn't get that. And the same thing with Hillary Clinton. We should have been able to say, stop it. We're going for Bernie Sanders right now. Get out with that. But it wasn't possible. We had to kind of like wait for all these revelations and things and people's minds to change. So I think there's a lot of cynicism in it in the like woke and identity politics, but obviously there's a lot of realistic stuff in it also. So trying to somehow like unpack it when everyone's mind has been like bimbofied by Netflix, because I am watching the Asimov Foundation series, but my husband read the books. And when we were watching it, he goes, this is very different from the books. And I said, in what way? And he said, well, the books were much more like collective and groups of people working together. And now it's all about like this girl boss and this cool guy and all these individuals. And that's all we've gotten is DreamWorks politics, Marvel politics, Pixar politics. We're like West Wing politics. One person stands up and gives a speech. Everyone claps and cries. The enemies are vanquished, turned to ash, and the day is done. We don't know how to participate in long-term projects and patience and allowing things to work their way through and convincing people over time. And I think we should talk about the misuse of identity politics, but I don't know that we're going to be able to, in like one article or even this book, We Were Never Woke, it should literally be the final word on it. But how do you make someone read a book?
I think we can be great. I mean, I call myself a recovering Bernie bro, right? I'm in recovery. And I think we can actually, I mean, at this point, I am grateful he did not get anywhere because he has totally stabbed his supporters and the ideals he claimed to stand for just in the back twice. At least, he shielded for Hillary in his first. I mean, it's kind of amazing.
There was an interview with him right after 2016 with Kshama Sawant and Chris Hedges, where he asked him, Sanders, why didn't you form a third party? You would have won. And I think he would have. He should have. That was the moment in time when the weight of the decision was on him, and he didn't have a Marxist-Leninist party with him. He didn't have people that he had to go to and be like, what should I do? Where they could come to a group decision, vote on it, where he knew someone would physically protect him, like the head of the Kenyan Communist Party. Terrorists went into his house to murder him, but his Booker, his comrades were in the house also with guns, and they shot the people who came in. And then the police showed up, half an hour later after everything was done. He would have had to have the wherewithal to defend himself against the Clintons, the Democratic Party as a whole, all the secret services, and the strength of spine, not just the willpower. And because he was just by himself, he said, as the answer, they would have destroyed me. And Hedges was Nader's scriptwriter and said, I know that they was the Clintons, but you could also just fill in all of the powerful people in the US that did not want him to become president. He failed because he was doing it as a one-person show, in my opinion.
It's kind of amazing. Bernie Sanders, stabbing his supporters in the back, and even as a Jew, standing with Ukrainian Nazism. And actually, it reminds me. I'm sorry, it's a little off topic, but it reminds me. A couple of years ago, I think it was a CNN article. It was this Jewish American who was being interviewed by CNN. And he was like, "Yeah, he was literally like, my family in Kyiv was murdered by these Ukrainian bandierists, but I forgave them and I stand with Ukraine." It's just so I don't
His
even
foreign
know what to say.
policy is awful. he talks about class with the domestic politics, but then he just is a big supporter of imperialism in his, international politics.
Well, I'll say, I think he's a good microcosm for what's wrong with American leftism, because, if you look at like 2012, Bernie Sanders versus 2020, Bernie Sanders, they don't even seem like the same person, because there were certain, and that was actually what appealed to him, is he just said, because he's like you said, he's been active since like the 1970s. He just says what he believes, even if it's not like the party line. So he's like kind of pro-gun. I remember like his most controversial stance was that he was actually anti-immigration. And like people would ask him, why are you anti-immigration? It's like, because I want, the socialist welfare state, but you can't put the entire world on welfare. It doesn't work that way. You have to limit the number of people.
If you really want your mind blown, go back and find early interviews with Nancy Pelosi. She was when people say that AOC is Pelosi 2.0, they're on it, because early Nancy Pelosi, I was like, what happened to that woman? Because she was spitting fire, talking about injustices, all this stuff. I mean, this was 1,000 years ago, but you can see what the application of money. And if you go in as a bourgeois politician, like for example, Mamdani now, you go from previously your daily interaction was with members of your party, working class people, the volunteers. And then the moment you go into the city council or parliament, now your daily peers are lobbyists, the other compromised politicians. And so that's just going to be a weight on you if you don't have a party that you're required to meet with every week and go, here's what they want me to do. Here's what they're saying. What do you want me to do as a tool of the party? There's no such thing as a bourgeois politician. It doesn't matter if they came in earnest and then returned, or if they were faking it the whole time and were bred in a CIA vat. You're not going to get a difference in outcome if they don't have that party behind them, where they are just a tool going into the electoral system for the party itself.
I didn't know that about Pelosi. Go ahead.
Speaking of AOC, I remember right after she was elected, after she was elected and sworn in, and she moved to Washington. Was it Washington? I'm sorry, I don't remember. Maybe it was in New York. But anyway, she moved into this new apartment, and she did this silly. A lot of people are making fun of her for it, but kind of reflecting on it, I kind of understand what happened. She did this TikTok of her new apartment, which was this very, very luxurious, and she was just losing her mind over this incredibly, like, the most luxurious.
We would sell out too, Ian.
Ever.
We would sell out.
And it's just like, I didn't see the significance at the time, but I was just like, that is the moment, regardless of how she felt before that is the moment. It's like the reverse of, what was that Jimmy Stewart movie? Mr. Smith
goes to Washington. Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
It's like the opposite of that story, because he didn't sell out. He's the one young politician who didn't sell out, and that's why it's like such an inspiring story. But most people go to Washington, they sell out because they're so amazed.
It's how Sæþór described it, and you just see it all the time. They figure out what we want to hear, but they also are instrumental in shaping what we want to hear, right? So they shape us as best they can, and then they figure out what we want to hear, and then they'll run somebody to tell us what we want to hear. It's like, I always say Trump at least gave lip service to what I wanted to hear, like with his anti-imperialism and with certain things. And whereas Kamala didn't even bother trying to lie to me. Like, she didn't respect me enough to even come up with the lies that I wanted to hear. It was really awful. Of course, I would never vote for either one. I don't want to sound like I was supporting Trump or anything, but no, Trump had a speech where he said exactly what I wanted to hear. We're going to end these stupid forever wars. We're going to have great relations with China and with Russia, and we're going to end the war. Anyway, of course, it was all lies. Like, it was all always, just telling us what we wanted to hear. So you have political support, you get a political movement in power, and then you just do whatever the billionaire class tells you to do. And we've just seen that over and over. I didn't know Pelosi is just like Trump was. That's interesting.
I think
To go back to the woke aspect in this book, is he described it also. What happens is the upper middle class is both influencing what we're going to read about, but it's also gatekeeping for the next version. So if you think about who gets to write for Netflix or SNL or the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times or any of the other like blue MAGA media, they're the ones who say that you have to say Latinx, pronouns in bio, land acknowledgement. And then if you might actually be competent about whatever the thing is, you might be funny like Tim Dillon, but if you don't know the right words and way to hold yourself, you're not going to then get hired to come into that role. And even if you somehow manage to go over the line, unless you're, the owner's son, you're going to get ejected very quickly. So then once you're in, it's like this incestuous, no connection to anyone else but themselves. And I think we're seeing it in some of the movies and series that we're getting when they're so disconnected, like the 3-Body Problem from Netflix. And they're like, oh, there's spontaneous riots because everyone found out the aliens are coming in 200 years. And I'm like, tell me you don't know how riots work without saying it outright. There's no such thing as just spontaneous riots from one piece of news. We're watching what it takes now with ICE and all the development. Like, this has been years and years in the making. It can trace its roots back to the 2020 Black Lives Matter summer and no justice from that, the inflation, all of that. So we're getting people who are crafting a narrative that only the children and the future would-be elites know how to repeat, so that they can then go into those high-paid jobs to then craft it again in the future. And this is good for us who are anti-imperialists, because we can actually be in connection with the working class, who it's very easy to say the elite are demonic sexual freaks. And most working class people are like, yep, that sounds right. Versus you've got Matt Taibbi and all the rest going, boring. This Epstein stuff is boring. Who wants to read about this? Or whatever other justification. It's really Putin behind the strings. So we have the opportunity to start describing why things are happening this way. And I was in a class just this week, and this random woman was next to me, and she was saying, but aren't a lot of people burning out these days? And the professor or the teacher was like, yeah, but why would that be? And this woman just goes, I think it's capitalism. And she's not in my party. She, I was talking to her in a break. She's in like a centrist party, but just young woman just blurted out, I think it's capitalism's fault. I'm like, you would not have heard that 5 or 10 years ago, versus all the in crowd is trying to justify this is good. This works. What inflation? If only Hillary had won, we'd be in paradise now, all this other nonsense.
And I do want to catch up on some of these comments, because we've been getting some comments in our feeds. So our first one is, when is Ian going to sign up for the ACP reserves? Well, I told the ACP I am more than happy to help them with Moscow and Russia related issues. They haven't contacted me, but I told them that. So
help them with your money.
Right. And then our next comment is from Dust, who's a longstanding viewer and sometimes a guest even on the show. He says social progress is inherently tied to Western imperialism. They just use sale of virtue signaling to promote themselves. Companies promote the idea of economic policies to facilitate social processes for the masses. However, I do think our guest today is right. When you said that people feel like it's, social progress is tied to U.S. imperialism. And I think to an extent, I understand what Des is saying is, communist movements have these ideas of progress, but I think to an extent, your friends are right to feel that's tied to U.S. imperialism, because if U.S. imperialism collapses, it's going to be very, very different. And I think people who live outside the U.S. bubble, not even in the U.S. itself, just in the U.S. bubble, if you move outside the U.S. bubble, it's a very different world when you can't just pull $1 trillion out of your ass, which we can. Like
to his comment, I agree, but I like to sometimes ask, how many of the 800 million Chinese people lifted out of poverty were single mothers, children, trans people, gay men, racial minorities, overly represented? Because that's the thing that we always hear, is that homelessness, lack of health care, violence, that it falls heaviest on trans women, on immigrant women, on queer teenagers. I agree. That is why an economic-based system helps us the most, versus if you try to just do the identity politics without any class stuff, that hasn't improved the bulk of what you would consider queer people in the West. The poverty's going up, so it's going up on us the most.
But they want to, keep us away from the economic issues, from the class issues, and they manage to. Is it called pink washing? Is that one term for, or is that more foreign policy related? The term pink washing.
Pink washing is for women, and rainbow washing is for queers.
Okay, so yeah, various countries, if they treat women badly, we want to drop our pink bombs on them, and if they're bad to LGBTQ, then we drop the rainbow bombs.
Mm-hmm.
And Starfire says 42% of Americans still believe Russia is communist. Yes, and you can see this on my social media. Half of people call me a communist, and the other half call me a Nazi, right? Because they think
I went to Prague in 2004, and when I told my mother, she asked me if they were still communist.
The Czechs are communists, in
2004.
The Czechs are whoever is in power in that country. The Russians come or the Germans come. I'm sorry, but it's Czechoslovakia.
What is one of the attacks against Russia is that they're homophobic. They've outlawed homosexuality. I think it's a little more nuanced than that, right?
Yes.
Well, also that if you are an opposition, you will be killed by Putin personally pushing you out of a window, and this is amplified by the bullshit about the Skripals, which was just MI5, and Navalny, which was MI6. He was slated to be in that prisoner exchange. And this is like the total ignorance of Putin's time in power, because after the dissolution of the USSR, there was like mafia style oligarchs offing each other in the street, crazy crime and violence. And part of the program that Putin wanted to develop was to have more security, because businesses, the oligarchs that he also has to juggle, business goes better when you're not just constantly being offed in your boardroom. So like the random drive-by crime is down under him. But when the UK and the US can control all the media, they can say all the people that they killed, it was actually Putin who did it.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good question. So, and I want to address that because it comes up, as you can imagine. It comes up a lot. It comes up in almost every conversation, actually. So it's true. Russia passed the law against LGBT propaganda, which is controversial even in Russia itself, because it is limiting people's speech. Because ideally, you should just be able to say, as long as it's not advocating hurting someone else, you should just be able to say what you want. So it is a controversial law against LGBT propaganda. However, when people ask me, is it better to be, I'll use the most extreme case, is it better to be a transgender, male to female transgender person in Russia or in the USA? And I actually say, in general terms, I think it would actually be better to be transgender in Russia than in the USA. People are like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, it's because the USA is a very exhibitionist. We don't even realize how exhibitionist we are. We're just obsessed with sex and gender and all this stuff. And the thing is, it's very polarizing. Because one half the population, just loves LGBT stuff, and the other half just hates LGBT stuff. But we're obsessed with it.
But still looks at the porn.
Right. And we're right, exactly. And we're just very obsessed, whether you love it or hate it, we're just very obsessed with it. But, and I made this argument, I think, to somebody he was actually in Russia. We were sitting at a restaurant. So one of my friends asked me, well, is it better to be transgender? He's a Russian guy. He asked me, is it better to be transgender in Russia or in the USA? I actually I amazed everybody. It's like, it's better in Russia because, and the reason why is because people don't sit around all day thinking about it. Like, they don't care. Like, they don't look at people like, oh, is that person gay? Is that person transgender? If you go into a restroom and you present as female or whatever, there aren't going to be people staring at you like, is that really a woman? Is that really a man? Because they don't care. They're not thinking. It's just not on their minds. But it's not
the way that I address it. Because, for example, when I was single, if I had to choose between living in the United States as a gay man or living in China as a gay man, well, I would rather have the economic foundation, safety, and lack of daily violence of China. But as someone married and with kids, like, I like having the legal recognition. But I think the best address is that every place needs to work on their social development and human rights and how children are looked at. Just every aspect has room for improvement. But how do you improve people's daily life? You do it with a connected struggle where you have some actual control as a group. And so the gay men of Russia, the trans people of China, the intersex people of Iran, they're already there, and they already are working on improving their lives. The gay people of Palestine, and what they need is to stop having bombs and sanctions making their project harder. Now Israel uses Grindr to find gay men in Palestine and then blackmails them to work for Mossad, or they'll out them to their family. That's not a gay man that can sit there and actually do activism to get same-sex marriage in Palestine. It would come eventually the same way we got to do it in the US or the UK or Iceland, where we had the stability and the long-term project to meet each other. We had enough food, we had enough education, transportation to be like, and now I want to work on children's literacy or women driving or gay marriage. You can't do that when the US is trying to destroy your nation and put in a puppet government to make resource extraction easier.
Guys, I just what you were saying, you just reminded me. I'm going to share this share screen. Hold on, I'm just going to share this meme. I just looked. It made you, what you're saying made me think of this. And this is meme. This was the meme was popular when, it's like, but what, this is literally the argument with people. And it's not even an exaggeration. People would say, well, what if you were gay in Gaza? Well, you would live in a city they're bombing the shit out of it. It's like, are you serious?
But also, a trans man went to Palestine, and there's a whole video of him going around and everyone just treating him completely with hospitality, hugs. Like, so this is the same thing. If you don't like it, leave. I've gotten that. Like, I'll still talk to American friends who have conservative friends, and we get into it on Facebook, and they think I'm still an American living in America. And then they say, if you don't like it, leave. And I'm like, Charlie, you want to take this or should I? It never goes. I can't ever say I did leave and it's better. And they go, oh, okay, now my mind is made up. This is a lazy argument for people who can't.
Oh, I get so many people say, well, if you like Russia, why don't you move to Russia? Well, but what you're saying, I mean, it's a good point what you're saying though, because because I've not been to Gaza, but I've been to Kuwait and Iraq. Well, Iraq was kind of a war zone, but Kuwait was, the normal Arab country I've been to. And it's very much like, I mean, they don't care if you're gay or whatever. Because they do have morality laws, so you can't have like orgies or whatever, but which applies just as much to straight people as gay people,
exactly.
Right? I mean, if you're just there, I mean, no one cares if you're LGBT or not, especially as a foreigner, because I think that's the thing people miss too when it comes to cultural norms and morality laws and that sort of thing. This is not just Arabs, but I think in general, globally, it more applies to them, to their local people. If you're just a visitor, if you're a foreigner who's visiting, especially if you're a Westerner who's coming to support them, it's like, I care about you and I'm supporting you.
Yeah,
they're not going to care.
It's Globo Homo, which for the longest time I thought it stood for global homosexuals. Like we
homogeneity.
it's like someone said globo homo, and I finally realized, oh, homogeneity or homogenate. Oh, okay, that makes more sense, but I like it less. But this also undermines any kind of local culture or nationalism. Like Iceland has an incredible history with communism, with independence. Like when we set up the society that now has all these incredible results in the 1950s, we weren't even 200,000 people. And we set up a currency, a healthcare system, university, roads. There was lots of Marshall Plan money sprinkled around, but like a real accomplishment. We have our own artists, poets, authors, and now we're basically hooked up to TikTok, Disney, American celebrities and fashion and everything. And we're losing any kind of our national identity to just be globo homo. And so it's like a very weird way where not even our gay rights struggle is kind of the guiding light anymore. We're just literally America's version, because that's the easiest and laziest, and everyone's on Twitter that could influence, the comedy shows and the television series here.
That's definitely a problem, and it's a strategy and it's a tactic of Western imperialism, to project their own things and then weaponizing those things. I wanted to ask you about, this idea that, we have conservative media and then we have liberal media, and kind of, these two different mindsets are inculcated. But I know within the conservative mindset that's, indoctrinated and inculcated deliberately through, exposure to our echo chamber, the billionaire run and billionaire owned, billionaire controlled echo chamber. They just have a very negative perception of what leftism is. So to them, a leftist is somebody that can't tell you what a woman is, somebody who thinks that, women ought to be able to participate in men's sports, if they take the right medications and declare themselves to be a trans person. So I think, there's an overt effort to demonize and to make ridiculous the idea of leftism in at least half the population, or at least the population that considers itself conservative. Mm-hmm. Do you have thoughts on that broader topic?
So we have an excellent Icelandic word. It's called smjörklippur, and smjör is butter, and klippur is like a big piece of it. And the idea is that if you are trying to have a conversation at dinner and your cat comes around and is meow, meow, bothering you, you just take a little bit of the butter and you smear it on their fur, and then the cat will be busy licking all the butter off for the next 45 minutes, and you can have your conversation. And I guess the Icelandic or the English version would be like a wedge issue. And these are the things that are designed in a think tank by whoever is working in the background of TPUSA or the Breakfast Club or Pod Save Boys to create something that the two teams can fight over this week. Absolutely nothing has changed whatsoever, other than like social conflict is higher. And I see these as one of them. This is, there's clearly actual meat on the bone in all of these debates, but they create like the most conflict laden version and drop it in. We had our previous finance minister tweeted, "I want to hear young people's ideas for economics." And this young gay reality star show tweeted back and said, "I have an idea." And the finance minister responded and was like, "Give it to me. What is it?" And this rapper, he's like, "You can go fuck yourself. You were in the Panama Papers." And one of the right-wing, a bisexual man himself, which is one reason we didn't get so much homophobia here, because he was like one of the whisperers for the Conservative Party. He was like, "How dare you talk to the finance minister like that?" And this rapper answered back, "You should be quiet too. I'll share our private correspondence on Grindr." And this was like in all the tabloids. And the head of the queer choir that we have is a member of this right-wing party. And she came in, despite never participating in any of the conversations, into the like queer chat group and was like, "Isn't this a threat?" And then back into the shadows. And for the next week, you had like working class queer people fighting over whether or not like sharing private correspondence from Grindr is a crime or against the like immoral or whatever. I'm like, you're protecting the worst sociopaths in our island from one of our young members of our actual community, and you're not even here anymore participating. You just like dropped it in and then like disappeared into the bushes like Homer. But that's kind of modern politics, because we don't get to have a say. There's no actual democracy within the Western governments, so they have to create some smearklippers or wedge issues for us to fight over. And that's why abortion was never put into law when Obama and the Democrats had the ability to do it. They didn't want to lose that as a thing to fight over. So, and Trump kind of like, because he's dumb, just like took it off the board by changing it. It was much better as a thing to go back and forth on. Same thing with gun rights. Same thing with,
That's so interesting you brought up abortion, because I remember like leftists on this show being so upset with me when I would say this, and I would tell them this because by the way, I lean towards being, I'm not a woman, so I don't have a vagina or a womb, so it's not a thing I'm personally worried about, but I lean towards being pro-abortion because I understand there's times when you just want to do it, and it is a personal choice. If you have you realize you have a child that's going to be severely retarded, or maybe you were raped, or just there's 100 different reasons you might decide I just need to make this situation go away. You don't necessarily want. So that's my stance. I'm more pro-abortion, but I said Trump was completely in the context of the U.S. government, in the context of the U.S. Constitution. He was correct, and the U.S. Supreme Court was correct to say it's a state issue. And let's just get so upset with me. I would say, well, Democrats, Roe versus Wade was terrible. It was terrible, and I'll tell you why. Exactly what you said. Because even countries that are more conservative, much more conservative, socially conservative than the USA, like Russia or Turkey, they have abortion rights, enshrined, legally protected abortion rights. Why? Because they had, when back in the 70s, back in the 60s, they had these cultural conversations. How should we handle abortion? What should our stance be? And they argued about it, and they figured out, okay, in our country, these are the rules on abortion. And, and that they had that conversation, 50, 60 years ago. But in the USA, we had Roe versus Wade, which just said it's unconstitutional to even talk about abortion in your legislature. So it was like you said, it's just this Damocles sword that the Democrats use and Republicans use every election cycle to say, well, if you don't vote for me, they're going to ban abortion.
And it's again devoid of class, because if women had housing guarantee, job guarantee, child care, here under 18, your kid just goes to the doctor and you don't pay anything. It's just completely free healthcare for the under 18 kids. So like all of these things would reduce the times that people pursue abortions without needing to change the law in any way. I personally would want that, just like if it's about a specific sex, everyone of the other one has to leave and only the women get to legislate, yes or no. Same thing with circumcision, only the men should get a say. But like, that's not really how laws work. But I'm always reticent to give my opinion as well as someone without a womb or
for some reason, all the people with opinions on abortion are men, and all of the people with opinions on circumcision are women. It's like the opposite of what it
we brought up the debate here a few years ago, and it was the very small minority of Jewish people living here that were saying that it was all anti-Semitism motivating the bill, and so everyone like let it go, and nothing was approved or changed at all. So it's the same still.
And we're acculturated into, just accepting it as normal, and so even if we're not Jewish, right? I mean, as far as circumcision goes.
But in the US, it was actually anti-masturbatory. It was from the same guy who invented golden grams and those other things. They thought that high fiber content would stop people from wanting to masturbate, which was the same reason women shouldn't ride bicycles. And if they circumcised all the male children, they would also masturbate less. So it was all Puritanism, not really connection to the Hebrew religion.
That's interesting. I have learned a lot, Sæþór, from listening to you, because it's like you are on the inside and you understand, politics in a certain way that insiders that is kind of really foreign to me. And just to hear your illustrations and your anecdotes, it's really enlightening, and it gives me so much to think about, how these things actually play out behind the scenes, and kind of like you were talking about how the the ruling class kind of reproduces itself. It protects itself, and then it prepares the next generation. The next generation does the same thing. So no, I found very interesting, but and it's kind of like a foreign language though, because I know what I know from social media, and that's about it. And being isolated here in my own home, and not really participating. So it's one of the reasons I did want to join the American Communist Party too, and to get involved, because that was one of the first things we discussed that we hit on. It was the great man theory, and there was also we need to get involved with the community, because by ourselves we just can't do as much, kind of thing.
And that is kind of, this is part of the one of the things that Lenin talked about with the interaction between practice and theory, and why you need to do it. Because if you only have theory, you're not necessarily going to know how to participate in a group. The practice of being in my union, being in the contract negotiation committee, participating in the strikes, who's going to show up, who's going to grab the bullhorn, being in the Socialist Party, participating in an election, trying to keep the board together and cohesive. And sometimes people spin out or leave for a bit and then come back. This is not really related to class analysis, but it's very important, so that the next time there is some kind of moment in time to do something or to organize energy, I'm not just like, hey, everyone listen to me. And it's like, who are you and why? And do you have a website? Do you have a party headquarters? Do you have an ability to send out emails to lots of people? Can you be on the ballot? So like all of this stuff that might seem a little bit boring is very important to show like the seriousness, and it interacts, because now the more Lenin and Marx and Ho Chi Minh and just everything that I read from theory, it reminds me of things that I'm doing in the struggle, and makes it more realistic, and that like bounces back and forth. And then the other thing I wanted to add is with Bernie Sanders, he would always describe the Nordic welfare state as like the end goal. That's what we should do, guys. But I'm here in the Nordic welfare model, and I'm like, it's still all the neoliberalism, class dynamics, capitalism, being in NATO, being in parts of the EU. It's dragging all of us backwards. We're losing the welfare system. We're losing the subsidized swimming pools, and maternity pay and all these other things is going down, because it's not enough to do it once. It was like a helicopter releasing chaff when a missile is heading towards it. These were the compromises in Europe, being between the US and the USSR, to forestall full revolution. We had a very strong communist party here in Iceland in the 20s and 30s, which is one reason why NATO came here, to help back up the capital class in case the communists tried a revolution. So, sprinkling around a welfare system was a way to forestall it. And now that all the parties are gone and dead, they can then, pull out like a Jenga block. So it's another lesson of why Sanders or that kind of style, or even Mamdani, like this is not going to incrementalize our way to paradise. It has to be an economic reset. And that's, one of my biggest lessons from now living here in Iceland, because if the incremental route worked, and if you could consider the welfare state as an end of history goal, then we would be there. And it's not. It's on its way back down to like American levels of precarity.
So another popular social media debate are the these not Norwegian countries, these whatever that area is, are those countries really socialist? That's a good debate. But no, that's a great context. It was a compromise, because socialism was strong there, and people didn't have the aversion to socialism that they were indoctrinated to have in the United States. And but yeah, so while they did compromise, then they eroding the power of the socialists, attacking socialism and undermining it, so that they could, like you said, just put in some big reforms that are going to benefit the capitalist class to the detriment of the working class. And we see that going on now. I mean, it's interesting. Like, what do you think big picture is taking place? Like, we talk about big picture politics. I hate to drag us there, but that's really what I like to talk about. I just see under Trump that we might have a global, conflagration. We might have a global economic collapse. I think a war against Iran, which is very possible and likely, could lead to a global economic collapse. And I think we can understand the war against Iran and what we're doing in Venezuela as an effort to prepare the global battlefield for a confrontation with China, with our peer competitor, and really attempting to weaken and maybe implement an embargo against China, because they're reliant on imports and exports. And if we can stop their import exports, we can really harm them economically. So this is what I see big picture going on. I think it's going to happen in the next few years. Sæþór, what about you?
I also agree, but I'm very curious because one of the reasons why the current attack on Iran was called off, like the planes were in the air and they like turned around in mid-route, is because there's not enough THAAD missiles, interceptors, not enough Navy sailors, ships, submarines, all this stuff. Neoliberalism hasn't just hollowed out the university system and the retirement system and the everything else in the US, the water, clean water, the sewage, all of that. It's not like capitalism could wall off the ICBMs and the military. It also is been undermined by all of this. So they're like, okay, well, we can't do it right now, but the reason they've been doing all of these war actions is because they need to. They're running out of like the power and the control. So like these two lines are in conflict, and I'm just wondering when, I like the term, these aren't the captains of industry anymore who set up the system. These are their failed grandchildren. So like, you had the original Hilton who set up the whole hotel chain, and now you've got Paris Hilton who's, just stopped being poor. There is someone in the U.S. government.
Stop being poor.
There's someone in the U.S. government that understands amount of missiles and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But then they have to explain it in a one page with cartoons to Donald Trump and Steve Miller and Pete Hegseth. And will they get access today? Will someone be in a mood? Will they think that it's something that won't go too far, but they underestimate the other person's response? So if they could just be like, okay, China's too big for now, Russia's winning too much for now, Iran could wreck Tel Aviv. If they actually pulled back to the US, like I was saying with the bubble over it, it's not a self-sufficient system. That's why they're doing all the attacks on all these things. So I don't know when it's going to be, but like this recent rug pull with the gold, where it was over $5,000 and then it lost like trillions in one day. I still have some podcasts I'm supposed to listen to that explain what it was, but it sounded like a way to somehow inject some more money into the banking system that's in a crisis. The Fed is doing the repos overnight that the last time they did in bulk was 2019, before all the COVID stuff gave them the excuse to print more money. So like, this is not a healthy system, and they just keep band-aiding it. They need more resources, like when they cracked open the USSR and devoured that. That's why they want Iran. That's why they want Russia. That's why they want China. But it looks like it's not actually possible to get any of these three. The little concessions they got from Venezuela, that's not enough. Even if they could crack open Cuba, that's not enough. I don't think they're gonna, but they need Russia and China and Iran, and these three are not on the table. So like, what is going to be the result? Because the Build Back Better bill didn't result in any increased production. The Big Beautiful bill isn't resulting in any increased production. Europe Strong and all the new Rheinmetall and European investments is really just money going over to the American weapons manufacturers. So like, this is, lines that are going like this, and they're going to intersect sometime. If I could tell you when, I'd be a lot wealthier than I am. But like, I agree that it's going to happen within the next few years or even months, because something has to change. These aren't, the ruling class doesn't have the ability to continue ruling in the same way. And the ruled over class is unwilling to be ruled over in the same way. And so those are the lines that are gonna, how spicy are the ICE protests in Los Angeles going to get? I don't think less spicy, but we got to see. But I'm glad now to see that Americans have the ability to sign up and participate in the ACP instead of being by themselves. And I'm glad now that Icelanders have at least one anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist party to give their vote for and to come and participate in, because that's my takeaway now from leaving the US, is that there was no political force at all for decades and decades and decades. And yes, most of it is because the FBI murdered them. But the fact that there wasn't one is that Americans could treat politics as like a hobby. I don't like NASCAR, so I don't pay attention. I don't like Warhammer, so I don't pay attention. I don't like politics, so I don't pay attention. And this idea that you could just not think about politics and things will be fine. We're watching now. It's like a garden outside. If you don't mow it, if you don't weed it, if you don't put fertilizer, you're going to open your door and there's trees and animals living inside. And then it's going to take weeks to whip it into shape. And that's, the takeaway. You got to start somewhere so that then you can progress to the next stages. And I see good work within the ACP. And I like to think we're doing good work within the Socialist Party as well.
It is obvious to me why they chose you to be the executive member chairman. It's been a great conversation and I learned a lot, just listening to, the perspective from someone who actually engages and deals with real politics. It's really, really interesting. And it just reminds me of how much I need to learn, and man. So, but I get involved. So, that's why I am getting involved. And I suggest, everybody get involved. And I appreciate your endorsement of the ACP. I also endorse the ACP. I am definitely not a spokesperson of the ACP, but I am a cadre. I'm a dues paying member. And so, yeah, they could definitely use your support if in no other way, just financially, monthly dues. Anything else, Ian, before we wrap it up? We've been going quite a while. It's almost an hour and 45 minutes in.
I think this is a good stopping point. We all three of us got our points in. We had a great guest speaker today. No, I think this is a good closing point.
As long as Sæþór agrees to come back and join us again, we will end the program and reconvene. Thank you so much, Sæþór. We'll have you back soon. I know Todd was demanding it, and he's also ACP member in New Mexico. So, okay. We will see everyone perhaps this Friday. If not this Friday, we'll see next week. Thank you. And